All right, welcome back to Unearned Confidence. My name's Ben, and I'm here with Kyle.
Hello.
Today, we have the special privilege of talking to Mr. Seth Mullendore. Seth is the Vice President and Project Director of Clean Energy Group in Vermont. Seth comes to us. He's got a background in geosciences and a master's from Stanford out in California in civil and environmental engineering and atmosphere and energy emphasis. We have the privilege of talking to you today about some things that we think our guests will find quite interesting, and that's how we get our energy into our homes, how we utilize them, where that energy is coming from, where that energy might be going, some of the stumbling blocks with that, and some of the entities that are working for it, maybe against it. Seth, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing pretty good. Thank you.
Yeah, we're super stoked to have you. It looks like it's a pretty sunny day there in Vermont.
It is. I've got solar on my roof, and it's a good day for solar. So
Nice.
All right.
Right on. It's cool to hear that. I recently learned this actually, that I have presumed that a lot of the New England states would be a challenge to have solar power plants on your house, but it works, right?
It does. It works right now. I can say that I've generated as much today as I did in all of January when my solar panels were covered in snow. So there are some challenges to that for sure.
Yeah, that's funny. I have a pretty sizable array on my house. It's I guess about 12.5 kilowatts. So it's embedded into the roof. It's not a Tesla type system, but it's embedded into the concrete panels, and it's awesome. As you know, we get a lot of sun out here in Colorado. I believe you lived nearby for a while, but we also get, particularly up here in Evergreen, a lot of snow. And
Yeah.
I just thought, well, that's during January, February, March, April, we're just screwed. We're not going to get a lot of. But then I hear that there's people out there talking about putting heating coils through these things, and problem solved, right? So,
Yeah, I mean, I have heard about that. So, mine don't have it. And when it heats up and there's a little patch that gets through, it melts off pretty easily. But yeah, when you get particularly here, we get the snow, and then it melts a little, and then you get ice on top of that, and then you're down for a couple of weeks.
right on. Well, if you don't mind, do you want to tell us a little bit about what you do, like what you're charged with doing at Clean Energy Group, and what sort of things you're working on a pretty regular basis?
Yeah, certainly. So, Clean Energy Group, we're a national nonprofit. We're based here in Vermont, but we work all across the country. The organization itself has been around for about 20 years. I've been with them for around 5 years now. My work is mostly focused on solar paired with energy storage. The majority of that work is a project we call our Resilient Power Project, which is focused on enabling greater access to what we call resilient power, which is really solar and storage for backup power and reducing energy burdens among disadvantaged communities. So we work a lot with affordable housing developers, facilities that provide community services to low-income organizations, low-income populations. Outgrowth of that work, though. So in that area, we work a lot on policy, do analytics around that to get information out, and we help facilitate actual projects getting developed. But some outgrowth of that work, we've gotten more into the health space as it interacts with energy independence, and then some of the work for today's conversation is looking at peaker power plants and the ability of batteries and batteries paired with renewable energy to act as a viable, cost-effective, and much cleaner alternative to traditional fossil-fueled gas plants. So that's a quick overview of my work.
Right
Would
on.
you mind if you? I'd be curious to hear a little bit more. I'm sure the audience would. Maybe what is a peaker plant, and how they kind of fit into the modern grid?
Yeah, so the grid basically has kind of three big buckets of power. So there's baseload generation, that pretty much does the same thing all the time. We're talking about traditionally big coal plants and nuclear plants, sometimes big hydro, that they're pretty flat. They just produce the same amount of energy pretty much all the time. Then there's intermediate power, and basically as load fluctuates slowly over time, it follows those loads. So they'll ramp up production and ramp down. These tend to be big gas plants. Increasingly we're getting wind and solar filling a lot of these holes. And then there is the power above and beyond what these base load and intermediate can provide. And those are called peaker plants. Peaker plants, they don't operate very often. The amount of time that a power plant operates is called the capacity factor. So it's the amount that it actually produces over time versus what it could produce over time. And peaker plants generally things that are 15% or less of the time. So that means they're operating 15% of the time or less. Lots of times it's less than 5% or less than even 1%. So a peaker plant may operate, say, 100 hours a year out of the over 87, 60 hours that are in a year. So not a lot. They tend to be gas plants, either combustion turbines or reciprocating engines. And they are fairly inexpensive to build. They tend to be smaller than the intermediate and baseload plants, but they're really expensive to operate. So they're the generators of last resort because they're really expensive when you want to power them on. And those are times like, say you're in a hot area and everybody's air conditioner is cranking, or you're in an area that's really cold and a lot of people have electric heating, and you're going above and beyond what baseload can provide and what intermediate can provide. Then you call on the peakers and the utilities say, okay, we're going to spend a bunch of money to produce this power because that's the only option we've got.
You were mentioning, so I want to just, for full disclosure, we're big fans of this YouTube show called Now You Know, and it's presented by father-son duo Zach and Jesse, and they did an episode a few weeks back on peaker plants and kind of gave the hey, these things exist and here's why, and the higher level sort of view of what they do. And one of the things that they mentioned, that they sort of illustrated it just like you did, like, summertime, Arizona, everybody clicks on their ACs all at once, boom, there's this load that wasn't there, 30 minutes before, and these things sort of step up to the plate so that brownouts and things like that are avoided, or straight up blackouts. But one of the things that they elucidated for me was that these plants are one, they don't just immediately snap on, like they take a minute. You have to, like, I don't know what exactly the machinations have to occur to make it, but these are big systems that have to sort of be put into place and fired up. So 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes of time is what they were saying to snap up. Whereas maybe an alternative to a peaker plant might be battery storage, where it just snaps on in milliseconds. Can you speak to that? Does that sound accurate to you? At least
that's certainly accurate. And how long the fossil fuel peaker plants take to actually ramp up. So, and that's the thing. So they're starting off either from a low level or not at all. And it takes them a while to build up that power level. And one of the actually really bad things about that is a lot of pollution control technologies don't kick in until you reach a certain level of generation. Mm-hmm. So there can be no pollution controls in place when those power plants are ramping up. And we'll talk more about that later, I'm sure. But yeah, so depending on the technology, there are even some old coal plants that are not economic to run as baseload anymore, and they're being used as peaker plants. Those can take a half hour, an hour to ramp up, and those, of course, are the dirtiest of dirties. Gas plants, like combustion turbines, they'll take quite a lot less time, in the like 10 minutes to a half hour. Mm-hmm. And then there are the reciprocating engines, and those are faster. They can be just a few minutes for those to ramp up and down. And those are being deployed more often now, but they cost more. So that's why traditionally they hadn't been put out there. And, basically we're just talking about a big engine. Big diesel engine would be a reciprocating engine. So these are the kinds of things that are kicking on. Yeah. So, and like you said, batteries, a fraction of a second for them to reach full power. So they're much more versatile. Plus, they don't spew out any emissions when they kick on.
That's kind of what I was wanting to determine. It doesn't sound like once they're in place that they, I'm sure there is certain footprint left by the manufacturer of these lithium cells and everything that goes along with it, and the tools and such to get them into place. But after that, it's apparently pretty damn clean.
Yeah, that's the thing. And of course, there's always a life cycle cost for these things. So there's going to be a certain amount of carbon from the mining of the resources that go into it to, putting it together and getting it in place somewhere. Once they're there, the storage system itself does not have any greenhouse gases, no emissions. Now, it does depend on what's charging those. So if you're charging them with a bunch of coal somewhere, that's not so great because it means you're doing more coal generation. But in places where there's a lot of renewables, say California or Hawaii, certainly, most of the stuff that you're going to be charging things with are renewable energy. And the more renewables you get on, the higher the likelihood that you're going to be curtailing some renewables anyways, and you can use that excess generation to charge up your batteries and use it for a time when you really need it later on.
That's cool.
Do you feel like?
Go ahead, Kyle.
Do you feel like it's necessary to put renewables in place before a big emphasis gets put onto storage, or do you think that rolling storage out and replacing peaker plants, even in areas where you're having baseload generation that's a little bit dirty, I'm just curious, kind of like what your logic is on where to start in the process of transitioning things in a state that has a long way to go.
Yeah, so I would say it's better to start earlier than later. I use somewhat the way that EVs are rolling out. There's been some reports that come out and backlash saying, oh, if you have an electric vehicle in a place where the predominant grid power is coal, that you're actually increasing emissions. Well, maybe in the short term, yes, that might be possible. But you're getting the technology out there, you're getting people more familiar with it, you're helping ease that transition and bring down the costs of those technologies in the meantime. So in the long run, it's a good thing for advancing the technology. So, and we're seeing places like California that are struggling at this point to get rid of some of their peaker plants. Even though they have very ambitious goals, they've got a lot of solar in California, but they're retroactively trying to figure out what to do with these peakers, and they're finding they're relying on them a little bit more now because of the solar. They're having more ramping, they're having more times where they need power to be there really quickly because they don't have something else to do that in place. They're dependent on their existing resources and using them more. So it's better to get ahead of that curve, let your utilities get more comfortable with it and how it operates ahead of time, start creating the value streams that you need in order to incentivize more storage, get all the kinks out before you find out it's too late. And you've got to kind of retroactively fit it into the system that you've created for yourself.
So let me expand. I want to go further with that, Kyle. That was the question. It's on my mind, not as eloquently put, but I'll mess this up a little bit, but just for the people that are watching. So getting very fundamental, when we talk about electricity, when a regular coal-fired plant, the general plant, not a peaker plant, is out producing electricity or creating it, that electricity, let's say a city's 100% need is being produced at any one time, but that need obviously it's not linear. It's probably much more like a sine wave. Or up and down, right? Needs heavier during one part of the day. So I would assume that a utility probably tries to work hard to match need with demand, but it can never be one-to-one, I assume, when storage is not a consideration. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, so I mean, this gets kind of complicated, and I will say this is not my area of expertise, but there's a certain amount of what they call inertia in the system because most of the generators that we have is turning things. It's turbines and things like that. So there's a certain amount of inertia. So if demand lowers, on some of these things, then the turbines start to rotate a little bit slower. If it rises, then usually you can just crank a knob and you start to go up. But there's a bit of a delay because of that. Now, there is some people are saying that as we get less and less spinning things going, particularly solar, to a lesser extent wind, that we're not going to have that same kind of inertia. So we need more of a buffer in there. And that's another reason why storage becomes that much more important, because it's there. It's just immediately can do that. That's some of the voltage and frequency regulation I was talking about. Storage can do that, no problem.
Perfect. So that leads me then to this thought, and is like it sounds like no matter what, when you have these spinning things, there's going to be excess energy produced that's just going to go into the atmosphere or not be utilized. So if these storage containment units can take, and instead of like, so we know that with a peaker plant, at least the traditional ones that are gas fired, you have to pollute in order to use the energy. You just have to. It's a byproduct of the production of that energy. And you also have to pollute when you're at your regular, 80% power, big coal-fired power plant. You have to produce pollution. But it sounds like there might be excess energy at any one time that can be then offloaded into these batteries. And then so by putting in or installing a storage unit, that you're capturing the excess from the main plant and then utilizing it more efficiently. Maybe I have that logic wrong, but that's the way I understand it. Is we could utilize that as opposed to having to create another pollution source to do that. Does that sound accurate to you, or within the shooting range?
Yeah, no, it's within the shooting range. There's been talk about, and again, we're less proponents of this because we're clean energy group and we're trying to get rid of fossil fuels completely to the extent that we can today. So there's been talk of hybridization of certain power plants. So putting storage, pairing it with existing power plants, so that power plant can operate more efficiently. With peaker plants, it could even mean that you have enough storage that you don't have to turn the power plant on at all. Right. So there have been some cases in California where there's been these hybrid energy storage with traditional gas turbines, and they've seen some pretty significant emissions reductions at those plants. But at the end of the day, you don't really want to make your coal plants more efficient and have them operating more. I mean, that's at least in my work. That's not why I'm putting storage out there. The idea is to get beyond that reality.
Without a doubt. I think that to me, that analogy, though, I use it when I talk to folks about driving an electric car. When they say, well, hey, yeah, you're driving an electric car, but that energy is still coming from a coal-fired plant, and they are definitely not wrong. That's shitty. It's not good energy. It's not clean. However, with this thing, steam recapture, you're at least more efficient while we get to the steps of total renewables. So nothing happens, like I said before, in a vacuum. This is incremental, and it's getting to a place of 100% renewable energy. But in the interim, it still makes more sense to utilize, at least currently, coal-fired energy in the steam recapture to get us to a place of total sustainability, as opposed to driving around our ICE vehicles where they're at a much lesser efficiency when it comes to fossil fuels. So that's something I try to understand better is okay, yeah, this is the albatross we're strapped with right now, and why it's better than maybe an alternative, but here's the direction we're going, kind of ideology.
So something that comes up in my mind as you're saying that is that I wonder if, and Seth will be able to speak to this better than I can, but I wonder if we were all automatons that made perfectly logical decisions, being as efficient as possible in putting things in place when it makes the most sense logically, that'd be the way to get there quickest. Maybe by kind of enabling utilities to do hybridization or something, it puts the momentum kind of in the wrong direction, and suddenly you're in this place where they're saying, well, we have this hybrid system where we're making our coal more efficient, and it enables them to put less effort into the transition than they might otherwise would. But I'm just speculating.
So let me, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but it's bringing up a good point, is that energy storage, you can put it pretty much anywhere. So it doesn't have to be a utility investment. It doesn't have to be this huge capital outlay for every system that you put out there. A lot of people have energy storage systems in their in their homes, batteries in their homes. So one by one, a home battery system isn't going to do a whole lot. But if you've got, I think it's a 14 kilowatt hour, the Tesla Powerwalls. If you've got 1,000 of those, then you're starting to talk about something pretty real. And that's not outside the realm of possibility. There's a company called Sunrun. They're the biggest residential solar installer in the country now. And they got a capacity contract, basically a contract to provide power to the New England system operator for 20 megawatts. They're using residential solar and storage systems. They're going to use thousands of them. I think it's something like 5,000 of them, but they can do that. Then they're under contract to provide that. 20 megawatts is not nothing. You start to ramp that up to commercial scale, which could be 10 times bigger than residential, or even 100 times bigger than residential. Then you start getting into hundreds of megawatts of systems out there, and these are the size of power plants. So you can have a solution that's distributed across thousands and thousands of homes and businesses, and that gets away from the utility paradigm that you're talking about, where the utility just does what they want to do and keeps operating the assets that they want to. It takes the control out of theirs. Now, they might be the ones that say, okay, discharge now and not now, and I'm going to pay you for that. But that's them paying you to provide that service instead of them using their own assets and just building and using whatever they want to.
Now, what would you say to somebody that says, well, okay, looking right now, wind energy doesn't produce that much energy in America, which I kind of believe it does. Solar doesn't do much. It's a small percentage. Hydro, maybe has a disproportionate amount of effect in certain areas, depending on what you've got in terms of resources in that regard. What is there? It seems to me like there is there's not going to be a silver bullet that knocks down all of our energy needs, but rather all of these things in concert, working together, the various sources of renewable, working with storage. How do you see that shaping up? Like, how, when people out there going, we want to go 100% renewable, sustainable. Well, what the hell does that even mean? Like, I know basic concept what that means, but what does that look like in real time, in real language?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've seen study after study that says using today's technologies, the existing technologies, you can get to 80% reduction in emissions. So you're getting 80%, even 80% renewables in some cases. Some folks, say nuclear in there. Some, that's not my area, but others say just wind, solar, hydro, and existing storage technologies, you can get to 80%. Now, that last 20% is going to be a challenge, and you're going to need innovation. You're going to need things like maybe hydrogen for long duration storage, or some other kind of long duration storage technology that we just don't have commercially available at a low enough cost right now. But using today's batteries, and we're talking about lithium ion batteries, they're the predominant one that's deployed out there, you can get to 80%. So that's going to depend where you are, certainly, and what kind of resources you have. What's that?
That could happen today, 80%, if we were.
That could happen in today's technologies. It's going to take a little time to get there, and it's going to take a lot of policy changes to get there. But yeah, you could do that with what exists today: solar, wind. Not a whole lot of new hydro. Most of these don't consider a lot of new hydro to be viable. So it's mainly solar. Wind for a while, and then solar really takes off as the predominant generation source in most of these studies.
Wow. So with renewable energy production, obviously, the bridge to make it really viable is storage. And batteries is the first place everyone's mind goes to. But I know, like here in Georgetown, we have up on the pass, there's two lakes, one's above another, and when they've got an electricity surplus, they'll pump water into the lake up the hill, and now that's stored potential energy, and they have a hydroelectric system to pump it down to the lower lake and recapture some of that energy. Obviously, there's an efficiency loss, but it's a way for them to kind of store that energy. And one could assume that if it was renewable energy that was generating the pumping electricity, it would be a kind of a nice way to store that energy. And there's other forms of storage. What's your opinion on other forms of electricity storage, excluding batteries? Are those viable?
Yeah, I mean, pumped hydro has been around for a long, long time, centuries, and it's the largest energy storage resource that is in existence today. We're just not getting a whole lot of new ones. There are some novel ideas for filling caves with water to provide new sources of pumped hydro, or compressed air storage in caves, things like that. They aren't at the price point where they make sense yet, and they still tend to be pretty geographically or geologically narrow, so you have to have the right conditions around. There are some novel concepts like using gravity potential, stacking giant multi-ton cinder blocks to provide longer duration storage. So when you get into the long duration storage, there's a lot of other things out there. Pumped hydro is sometimes considered long duration. Usually they have their maximum power level, 10 hours or so of energy storage potential, whereas lithium-ion batteries, usually don't see more than 8-hour duration applications of that today, although increasingly you're seeing a few tens and things like that. But so there's a lot out there. I will say, for the conversation about peaker plants and peaker power, you're talking less about those. And almost without fail, the projects that are actually getting done are batteries right now. So that's really the technology where we are in the peaker space and the shorter duration storage space. Long duration, it's going to take some work, and I'm not sure what's going to come out on top. I feel like that's a whole other episode we could go down that road.
So the gravity cinder block system, can you describe that?
Yeah, so it's a crane I think it has multiple arms that picks up, there's something like 50-ton cinder blocks, stacks them, creates a tower to build up the potential, and then when you call on it, lowers it down. And again, that spins the thing, creates electricity. That's it.
It's as simple as it is, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. There are other ones that you haul a train full of rocks up a hill. Mm-hmm. I've seen that one. There's actually, this is back to the EV thing, but there was an amazing story about a mine where they mine for materials at the top of a hill, and there's a giant, multi-ton pickup, basically a dump truck. That's an EV that's been running there. They never have to charge it because it fills up with dirt at the top and has more potential then, and it recharges itself as it goes down, then has an empty load and goes back to the top, and you never have to charge it.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So.
Well, if you mind, I want to switch to just a slightly different subject, and it's one we don't talk about as much here in the United States. I feel like I hear it talked about more in Europe and Asia. But the subject of renewables for us in America generally seems to concentrate around propulsion, and or an energy source of one form or another to power our homes, power our lives, our cars, et cetera. But what we don't talk about is how it relates to pollution, or in fact, the lack of pollution. And that seems like, depending on when our viewers or listeners are listening or watching this, you can see we're all in our own homes because of this coronavirus. We're all being socially isolating. But one of the things that probably you too, I have myself, have seen these images of. Some appear to be satellite images, some appear to be photographs of skylines, but there seems to be a measurable decrease in pollution, at least the visible type. And a lot of people are attributing that to the shutdown or the large scale reduction of our economy and all the associated fossil fuel industries being impacted by this. Is this happening, or are we all just kind of being hopeful here? I mean, are these things real?
Yeah, and again, I'll preface that I'm not an expert in this space, so what I can say about it is what I'm seeing in articles is as well, and it is a real thing. This actually happened in the last recession. Whereas economic activity decreases, you see less emissions. Here, it's even more extreme because we've got a lot less people out on the roads. There's a lot less transportation going on, both cars and planes. We've got a lot less manufacturing going on, a lot less economic just activity in general. So when that happens, there's a lot less emissions out there. Like I say, I've been watching New York City. We've been active there, and they're talking about, first they were saying 2% decreases. Now they're projecting they could have 10 to 20% decrease in the demand for electricity over the time period where the COVID-19 is keeping people at home and keeping people away from their jobs. So that's significant. That's a real measurable thing.
And these things in the air that we can't see that are going away. Again, I'm one of these Americans that hasn't necessarily paid as much attention to pollution as I should. I'm trying to get up to speed, but I'm still pretty stupid that way. But as it goes, do this particulate matter, is it bad for us? I mean, I think it probably is, obviously, but can you speak to that intelligently? The types of pollution that are out there, is it meaningful to us as humans?
Yeah. So, and I'll back up just a little bit to talk about why we at Clean Energy Group really got into peakers, and why there was a place for us in that space. Because there's a lot of groups out there that are fighting emissions. There's a lot of big organizations out there, NRDC, Sierra Club, that are fighting greenhouse gases and fighting the climate fight. And we're all for that, and we're in for that. But what has been kind of missed from the conversation is there's greenhouse gases, and these are things like carbon dioxide and methane. But then there's a lot of other things that are real localized emissions problems for local public health. And the reason that we focus on peakers is because they don't operate as much. These are not the big greenhouse gas emitters, just because they don't operate as much as baseload plants, and they're not as bad as coal. But what they do have is they're smaller, and they're located where energy demand is. So they're in load pockets where people need a lot of energy, which means they're close to cities, and sometimes they're in cities. New York City has about 16 peaker plants within its border, which is kind of amazing in such a densely populated area that there's 16 big peaker plants in operation there. So they produce a lot of nitrogen oxides and sulfur dioxides. And those are both precursors they can form particulates, which are bad for respiratory conditions. They can clog your lungs, and for ground level ozone, which is a precursor to smog. Again, really bad for breathing. So in places where these are, and they're usually places that have a lot of industry and cars as well, so they're just adding to this problem. I mean, these are predominantly environmental justice, low-income communities that are being affected by these plants. So these have some of the highest rates of respiratory conditions, in the country. They have much higher asthma rates. People on oxygen concentrators. You see a number of reasons that.
Let me interject just a second, because I want to get some clarity on that. You said that these tend to affect lower income areas. Is that just because of their proximity, like physical proximity of the peaker plants? Those don't get to be put in high rent districts like Westchester County. They're more or less put in like some place where the economics are depressed.
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of a chicken and egg thing here. There is often it's a lot easier to cite things in already disadvantaged communities, underserved communities that don't have as much political clout, don't have as much wealth to push back against things. And then there's the other, that when you already have a lot of bad stuff in one area, prices tend to go down, and that tends to be where people with lower incomes can afford to live. So,
Exactly.
and a lot of this has a long history of things like redlining, where people were specifically put in certain places because of the color of their skin. So that's, there are a lot of reasons why. And again, I'm not the best person to talk about this, but we work a lot with environmental.
There's something there.
Yeah, there's clearly something there. So, and usually peaker plants are not the only thing there. So these may be places that are industrial sectors. They may be places that are shipping areas, where there's a lot of vehicles going in and out, a lot of diesel emissions. So they have a significant impact. I mean, just looking at New York City, peaker plants during times when they can be operational, they can account for, say, 10% of the NOx emissions, the nitrous oxide emissions in New York City. And this, the size of New York City and all the other things are being polluted there. 16 power plants accounting for 10% of the NOx emissions is really a high level. And knocking them out would have a really appreciable impact on the health of those communities.
Wow. So you mentioned earlier that that there can't be environmental protection mechanisms. Those don't come into operation in peaker plants until they've reached a certain level of output. Am I saying that properly?
Yeah, you are. And again, not my area of expertise, but yeah. So basically, there are emissions limitations on a lot of power plants, but in emissions controls devices to make sure that they stay under those. But those devices don't work until you get to a certain heat level of the power plant. So as it ramps up to that, that's when it's really the dirtiest, and you're not really keeping track of those emissions as far as penalizing plants and things like that. The other thing that's important about peaker plants is that a lot of the environmental control policy and legislation and regulations that are out there don't consider these plants because they tend to be smaller. For anyone that's aware of, in the Northeast, there's the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which is a bunch of states got together and they put in basically a carbon cap among those states. But peaker plants aren't a part of that because they're small enough that they can get around it. The crazy thing is, it's not even just the peaker plants, because there are ones in New York City that are hundreds of megawatts, but it's the individual turbines, which may be, 20 megawatts or 40 megawatts. They fall under the threshold, so they're not a part of that program, and they're not a part of those emission controls. On top of that, some of these were installed in the 50s, a number of other ones in the 60s and 70s, before they had to have emissions controls. Wow. And they still don't have them. So they're really just awful. Some of these operate on kerosene, which is just extremely dirty. So it's kind of amazing the more you know about these, just the worse that they get.
Well, I'd be curious to see what. Sorry, I'd be curious to see what percentage of emissions they contribute to in proportion to the amount of electricity they actually generate. And it's got to be a wild number, huh?
Yeah, I think so. That's not a number that I have at my fingertips. I know some of the cost of electricity from those power plants because of how little they operate, and they often get contracts just to provide capacity. And that means that they get a contract to sit there and be available for whenever they're called upon. There's one power plant in particular that I know of in New York City. We've been doing work there. In 1 year, it operated around 30 hours that year, and it made hundreds of millions of dollars. The effective kilowatt hour cost of that electricity was $2.50 per kilowatt hour. If you look at your electricity bill, you're probably going to see somewhere around 10 cents in that range per kilowatt hour that it actually costs. So this is really, really expensive power.
It sounds like some shenanigans, to be honest. Hearing it from a layperson's point of view, it sounds like bullshit. And I hope, if nothing else, this conversation, to those who listen to it, are connecting the dots here. We're pretty confident that when we look outside and we see these satellite images, we see the horizon. Those are some of the obvious benefits of this otherwise really shitty condition that coronavirus has put us into. But for me, my takeaway is that this looks probably like the beginning of a renewable future. If you're wanting to know what it looks and feels like, it seems like this might be a small window into that opportunity. I mean, I feel like if we do keep working in earnest towards making our at least our lives here in the United States and hopefully everywhere around the world sustainable, that we can enjoy these days as a norm as opposed to an unfortunate side effect of a really bad thing.
Amen. So Seth, I have a question on, like, just curious. You're fighting entrenched players here in the energy sector, and we all know that they have a tendency to not play fair oftentimes. Are they getting in your way in any way? Are you having any problems with like regulatory agencies getting in your way? Like what kind of roadblocks do you run into with your guys' efforts?
Yeah, definitely. So the by and large, the utility industry is not known for innovation. These are people that historically, for decades, for as long as the power system has been around, they know how to build big things and run them, and have a big thing here and send power out to little people all over the place. Adding in new novel technologies to that, they resisted solar and storage, or solar and wind, and continue, in often cases, they've become so cheap in a lot of places that they can't resist them anymore. Batteries are still a little bit expensive, so they can still resist them. Now, utilities that are allowed to own them have been pretty interested. They like to own things. They like to build things so they can get a rate of return. They can get a return on their investment for building them. A lot of utilities are actually starting to get into storage more. But there's a lot of pushback about reliability. The utility, at the end of the day, reliability is often their number one, although for investor-owned utilities, first it's stakeholder returns and then reliability. But they are very hesitant to put anything in their system that they think could be less reliable than what they have now. And that doesn't mean that there's any technological reason for them to think that. It's just something they're not familiar with. So they are definitely slow walking energy storage. They do not want to get rid of their peaker power plants. And the regulatory structure is helping them along. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, they often can designate power plants as what's called reliability must-run plants. And that means even if the utility wants to shut it down, or if the regulatory body of the state wants to shut that down, the power plant owner can keep operating it. This actually happened in California, where the utility said, we don't want these gas power plants anymore. The owner of those plants petitioned FERC, and they said, okay, you have a reliability concern here, so you're allowed to keep operating, even though California doesn't want you, basically. So they had to keep paying them these capacity contracts, basically, to exist. So it's complicated. A lot of state folks, a lot of state, particularly state energy offices and legislative offices, they've been our friends. Regulatory and utility commissioners, they're a lot of times hesitant, like utilities. So it depends where you are, but it's a mixed bag. But certainly when then you get down to things like distributed resources, batteries in everybody's home, or a bunch of businesses, utilities are even more hesitant to do that, because it's a big power shift and a decentralization of what they've enjoyed for a long time is a centralized monopoly.
Interesting. Is there anything at this time? So we're charged with, Kyle and I are charged with distribution of information. We want to get people out there informed and aware of just where things come from, how they work. Is there anything that on a local level an individual can do to help those efforts that you guys are charged with working towards?
It's a good question. I mean, I think some of the best things you can do is be informed about it, listen to shows like this, get information, and then look for opportunities to use it. Advocate for, as people have done with solar, advocate for energy storage, and advocate for energy storage to be able to provide services to the larger grid. That's one of the beautiful things. A lot of people want energy storage because they want backup power. They want to be able to use it with their solar system. But it won't pay for itself unless you can tap into some revenue streams. And that's where you've got to press regulators to get the utilities on board and make that happen. So one of the biggest impediments to storage just in general right now is that the market mechanisms and revenue streams are just not there to offset some of the cost. And you need to have the utility as a part of that in order to bridge that gap.
Right on.
Do you think that renewable energy production paired with storage is something that will disrupt utilities? It seems like a technology that's going to be, like you said, distributed. What's the point of the utility at the end of the day if we really get to where we'd like to be?
Yeah. So so there's a thing called grid defection that some people have talked about people actually taking themselves off the grid. And then there's some kind of a lesser degree of that where people take a lot of their own load off. And that's a real threat to the utility model for sure. And then there are companies that are already doing this. There's a battery company, a residential battery company that we've worked with some called Sonnen. They're out of Germany. And in Germany, they've got more than 10,000 systems deployed, residential systems. And they have a peer-to-peer energy trading network where you can say, this is how much I want for my energy. And somebody else can say, this is how much I'm willing to pay for it. And you buy peer-to-peer. No utility. They have a platform, Sonnen does, that allows people to buy and sell from each other. You use the poles and wires, and we'll continue to need those, the distribution system, and to a larger degree, the transmission system. But as far as energy generation, it's being done peer-to-peer, household to household, business to business. So that'd be a nice place to end up, I think.
Right on. Yeah, great question. Well, let's start wrapping up here, but not without first asking you. You're at home, stuck like the rest of us, coronavirus going on. How are you keeping yourself sane? I see you've got a little kitty right behind you there, a little black cat or something along those lines.
That is a black cat. I've got two cats. I've got a almost 3-year-old, so that takes up the majority of my time when I'm not trying to get some work done. I'm fortunate enough to live on the side of a little mountain in Vermont, and I have some acres of land here, so there's a lot to keep me busy without having to interact with other folks. So, I feel like I'm pretty fortunate. Spring is here. I still see snow on the ground, but I'm getting out and doing a lot of outdoor stuff, which there's plenty to do.
Right on. Well, that's really encouraging. Seth, we've loved having you here. We want to have you back again when it makes sense for you, particularly if it can be face-to-face. That'd be great at some point when we all get out of this quagmire. Yeah. It's been a real treat, and we wish you the best of luck moving forward. You can find us on theucshow.com. We'd love for you to subscribe.